key risk events for next week. Hi, it's Charlie giving you Saturday's video here. So I'm recording this Saturday morning and we're just going to talk through a couple of the key event risks for next week. Now, going into next week, we've had warnings from the Japanese central bankers, finance ministers, that they are acutely watching the direction of the yen, and I've got the dollar yen up here, and they have threatened just a week ago that they would intervene again in this market. So one of the key events risks for next week is in the yen, or any yen pair really, but I've got the dollar yen up here. So if I go out to a quarterly chart, just to put it into perspective, you can see the move that we've had here. We've come back up to that 1998 and breached it, the 1998 highs now. And so really, we're now looking right away over here to the 1990 area of highs, right away up towards 160. Now, we don't have to just go there in a straight line, of course. Let's take this back to the daily charts, because one thing that we saw just a couple of weeks ago on this big range day here was this really volatile day, and that's when the Japanese Ministry of Finance intervened and bought yen. So the risk is that if you've just bought dollar yen, so to speak, going into Friday, then there's always going to be a risk that there's central bank, or it's not central bank, it's the Ministry of Finance intervene, which could create some volatility there. Now, I don't want to put anyone off. They're just risk events. They may not intervene, but they have threatened to intervene again, but maybe they don't. But at the moment, they are watching it. They are announcing that they are watching it. And so it certainly, now we are well above the highs of that day where they last intervened. You've got to be a bit careful if you are in a yen pair, just in case that happens. Maybe it doesn't happen, but it's a risk event going into next week. Now, if that was to happen, that could spill over into the likes of the other major currencies. So I've got the euro dollar here, which ended up selling off a little bit there yesterday, like most of them. If I go to the pound dollar as well, that one sold off as well yesterday. But we saw previously that when the Japanese Ministry of Finance intervened in the yen there, that we actually saw the other currencies appreciating against the dollar. So if that happens, if we see an intervention come in, then the risk is that we actually, from a risk perspective, then we actually see these other currencies such as the pound dollar, the Aussie dollar, they bounce on the back of that. The other risk event next week is going to be, while I've got the pound up, we've got the UK inflation figures out. I think it's Wednesday morning, and so that's early Wednesday morning. That's another risk event for sterling here, outside of every other risk event that sterling seems to have on a day, hour to hour basis. And then lastly, I think it's overnight Tuesday, we've got the third quarter GDP coming out of China. And so again, all eyes are on what's going on, of course, over there in China as well, being one of the manufacturing engines of the world. And so those third quarter GDP figures are going to be of interest as well, because if we start seeing those slowing down, again, it just spills over where to? Into the stock market. And lastly, looking at the S&P here, after the huge reversals that we saw on CPI day, which we can see yesterday took back a reasonable chunk of that, but it's still not over as yet. And but certainly what was a strange day there on CPI day, because those figures came out so hot that one would have thought that the stock market would have carried on selling off. It didn't, it reversed, but fun enough, now we're reversing the reversal. So we shall see if this can get back down to those lows. If we get back down to those lows, bear in mind, this was a big reversal bar. So if we take out the lows of the reversal bar, that should be deemed to be fairly bearish there for that market as well. So there you go, short video today, really just about the markets coming up and the event risks going into next week. So we've covered off. Of course, there's event risks with the UK, with Japan and China, and all that. Although we've got a bit of a quieter economic calendar outside of the China's GDP and UK inflation figures. Sometimes it can actually, I was saying to our members yesterday, it can actually free up the market because there's no news for the market or no major news for the market to look forward to. So the market sometimes can move a bit more freely. So we shall see. Watch your risk as always. Trade safely out there. I'll be back next Wednesday.